Stefan Harris. I'm with the National Assessment Governing Board, and I'm here to invite you to our first ever hangout on here. And we are going to be talking about using education data to encourage student achievement and also show how that data could be a tool and a resource for you. Before we kind of get started, I want to kind of go over for attendees, some logistics you may need. If you want to submit a question, if you're logged into Plus here at Google and watching from our event page, you can turn in your query by clicking on the icon of the 4 white boxes in the top right of your screen. You can choose the Q&A option, click on Ask a New Question, and type your question into the Q&A chat box. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, type your question into the comment box below the video. All right. I will briefly introduce our panelists who can give you more detail on who they are and what they do. They are both governing board members, and they are both education leaders in their area. First, we have Doris Hicks. She is a local principal in New Orleans, and we have Rebecca Gagnon, who is a school board member in Minneapolis. And I will have each of them tell more about themselves and their roles with us, and also what they do in their local area. First, I'll begin with Doris. Doris, did you want to tell the audience more about yourself?
Absolutely. Good morning. And as Stefan said, I am a member of the National Assessment Governing Board. I am Doris Roche Hicks, and I am principal at Dr. Martin Luther King, the exciting Dr. Martin Luther King Charter School in New Orleans, which is the Big Easy, and we have pre-kindergarten through 12th grade. And let me just tell you, we're located in the lower Ninth Ward section of the city that was devastated by Hurricane Katrina. We had 50 to 20 feet of water, actually. And prior to Katrina, we were a neighborhood school. But after Katrina, we became a charter school, and we are loving it. So I'm just really glad to be on here this morning. Thank you, Stefan.
I'm Rebecca Gagnon. I am a citywide school board member in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I am also on the National Assessment Governing Board with Doris, and I welcome you guys this morning. I'm really thrilled to be here. We have around 35,000 students in our district. We serve a city of around 300,000, and I actually have 2 kids in the system right now, a 5th grader and a 11th grader, and just love serving on the school board. And we have an incredibly diverse group of students. We're a safe haven. We have a lot of immigrant families, and around 90 languages are spoken in our homes. So we have incredible diversity, which is a blessing and a challenge for our resources, and we use data a significant amount to make policy decisions.
All right, great, thanks. Before we go into the discussion, I do want to take people through our website. The governing board, for those who don't know, we oversee NAEP, or as you may know it, the nation's report card, and that is the premier measure of student achievement in this country. So what I want to do is go through our site that we have online. It's called the NAEP Data Backpack, and what we have done here is really take our NAEP data and created basically a home to show how tools, the data really can be tools and resources for you. So what I want to do is briefly go through this before we go to our discussion. As you see, we have our homepage, NAEP Data Backpack, and I want to take you through 5 areas of the site. First, we have what we call Explore Achievement, and that is where you can kind of go and see NAEP data for the nation, for your state, and NAEP actually tests 21 large urban districts throughout the country. So you'll be able to see results all along those lines and really see how kids are doing. The next area that we have is Context for Learning. And NAEP has, in addition to scores, you always probably read about scores in various subjects, but we have a wealth of data contextual variables, and that is when we look at things for what teachers are doing, what kids are doing. For example, after school activities for students, do they read, how often they read at home, what teachers do outside of the classroom or within their class, and we use that to kind of really look at how those traits affect achievement or how they correlate with achievement. So it has some great data, and I think it gives great context to numbers. Our third page is what we call expect high standards. And this is really looking at NAEP in terms of our we have 3 achieve mid-levels in NAEP: basic, proficient, and advanced. And proficient is often considered really a kind of a mark of what students hopefully should be able to do and perform in various topics. So we have various things on that site that really kind of show that, and including a state mapping report where we rank states how they do in terms of the NAEP proficient level. And we also have a link to frameworks, which is kind of the foundation of NAEP. We decide in that process for the frameworks, how the test is built, essentially. So I think that will have some good information for you. Our fourth page is encourage college preparedness, and NAEP has really tread some new ground, and we used 12th grade NAEP last year in order to measure academic preparedness of 12th graders who took NAEP reading and math. How academically prepared are they for college? And we have links to the report that we have, and also videos and infographics that we've done on that. So some great resources there, particularly as everybody's really concerned of how kids are going, fare in our global marketplace. Our last tab that we have is Discover Technology and Assessment. NAEP has really made some inroads lately on technology. First, we have a technology and engineering literacy assessment that we will be releasing late this year that uses tasks to measure how kids perform in those in that area. We've also used our NAEP writing. We've had the first ever computer-based NAEP writing, and we've had results for that. You'll be able to see reports that we've done in that, and we also have had hands-on and interactive computer tasks in science. So we've actually had a test where kids perform actual tasks, hands-on and interactive, to really measure their ability in science, not just a hands test where you just choose answers to things. It's really using interactive tools to see how they perform in science. So again, that's the NAEP Data Backpack on the governing board site, and it's a trove of information that we really make good for you. So doing that, I want to kind of begin our Q&A. We want to make this a discussion where we're kind of really kind of responding to your queries and really kind of having a discussion on how data, including NAEP data, can really be used as a tool and a resource. And I want to go to our first question that we have, and I want to pose it both to Doris and Rebecca. What are some ways you have used assessment results or other forms of data to inform your work in education? Doris, did you want to start with that question?
Absolutely, and I'm so glad you asked me. Well, let me just start off by saying to you that in educational circles, data is a synonym for instruction. So achievement data offer invaluable support for making good decisions for education. We make data an ongoing part of our instructional program at King Charter School. We use data first to provide corrective action, and I think most schools do that. And then we use data to give our students second chances to demonstrate success. And let me tell you, the data that we find that is so important are the teacher quizzes, the tests that they give on a regular basis, and then look at that, and if they have to change anything, they're able to do that. Those summative tests, those standardized tests that are given at the end of the year, well, like at the end of the year, and a lot of instruction are near ending for that year. So there's not a whole lot of time to do any changes there because the results come back so late and the kids have moved on. But data is an ongoing valuable asset at King Charter School. Thanks, Stefan.
Rebecca, did you want to also take that question as well?
So just to add a little bit to what Doris said, I completely agree, but it does have to be good data, the right data, and data that informs practice and policy. So, you know, Doris is more on the ground in the school. I am at the board policy level. So I really need data that I can disaggregate, data that I can compare, and several data points where we have state testing data, classroom data, and things like the NAEP scores and the backpack, which breaks a lot of that down and provides greater context for the data. So we use that every day to inform decisions and to move student achievement in Minneapolis Public Schools.
Wonderful. We have one more question. Testing obviously has been in the news lately, particularly with Common Core. Quite a bit of discussion about that. What do you both see the role of NAEP with Common Core and those other assessments? And do you think the multiple sources of data can really come together to you know, for policymakers to make informed choices about education with this landscape? Doris, did you want to answer that question?
Absolutely, and I'm glad you asked me that, because I actually believe that the persons, the groups that prepared the Common Core standards and the developers of the Common Core test actually have gotten ideas and approaches from NAEP. I actually believe that. And NAEP, I think, will play an important role as an independent measure of student achievement under whatever policies and reforms that the states will take. And also, as I said, that multiple data, as you indicated, multiple data will certainly play a key role in student learning.
Rebecca, did you want to also take that question as well?
Yes, I appreciate that. So you know, public education is a state right, which we all value, which is a good thing. But I think what Common Core conversation started was, how do we compare apples to apples, states to states? And NAEP is the only test that has been doing that for over 25 years. So having the NAEP to continue that high college-ready gold standard of how our states are doing compared to each other, that allows us to then look at the Common Core implementation, which not every state is doing. And states, some are creating their own assessments, some are adopting the more standardized packaged assessments. And this will allow us to see that process roll out. And in moving forward in the future, it's really going to be important that we continue to see how states are doing compared to each other on the NAEP tests.
Right. On that note, Rebecca, I did want to ask you. You had talked about your school your school in Minneapolis, the challenges that you face. And now, have you seen any particular reforms there in the schools, made as a result of education data? People have looked at data, either local data, state data, NAEP, and looked at the results and kind of used that directly to make changes in the schools there?
We certainly have. And, you know, one thing, we look at a lot of data points, and when we were not getting the significant gains with our students that speak a language other than English at home, we looked across the nation at NAEP data and who was doing better. Who was doing better with those particular demographic of students. And we reached out to other urban districts. One was St. Paul, our next door neighbor, and we invited folks in to help us reform our system of English learner instruction in the classroom at school sites and how the district supports English learners. So it's transformative to be able to have those data sources and constantly change what we're doing, because the world's constantly changing and our student demographics has changed significantly over the past 30 years. So we need that constant support.
Right. Doris, I kind of want to kind of have the same type of query for you. In New Orleans, have you seen actions or reforms that were made on the basis of education data to improve schools there?
I am glad you asked that. Well, in New Orleans, we're no longer a school system. We are a system of schools, because practically all of our schools now are charter schools. And let me just tell you, prior to Katrina, there were public schools, very little charter schools. But based on the data that the state received years over, that they felt that the students in New Orleans were not receiving the quality of education that we desired, etc. So therefore, practically all the schools now are charter schools based on the data that was received. Now, it's been almost 10 years since Katrina, and now we may have mixed emotions about celebrating the anniversary of Katrina, but we do celebrate a new pathway of education in New Orleans. So that has been a huge reform in our city.
Wonderful. I did want to also ask, obviously, people who know you, they know you serve on the board, and they may, know a little bit about NAEP, and at least know NAEP doesn't give individual school or student results. So there may be the question of, well, if we can't get results at the school level and, how our kids are doing, how can NAEP be useful? What can I take from NAEP to really be, to really kind of help improve achievement, really learn about what's going on, and really use NAEP as a resource? Do we know it to be a resource, but some folks out there may not know if they don't know NAEP. How would you respond to that, to show how NAEP can be a resource? Doris, did you want to go ahead and start?
Absolutely. And let me just tell you, at King Charter School, we start off with professional development each year, introducing and reintroducing the staff to the NAEP data backpack. And there's just so much on the website that we can use. For instance, the teachers are able to go and get sample questions. They're able to do that. We can look at the factors from home that affect learning, and we can just look at that rich data that's there to see if those factors are affecting and school. And there are factors, data, schools from teachers. So there's just a whole lot. There's the, as you mentioned earlier, the 12th grade preparedness. So once they get on that NAEP data, our educators, our parents, our students, they're not going to get off of that, because there's just so much data that's there, rich data that they can use. So we're excited about the NAEP data, and immediately when they ask me, I turn them on to the NAEP data. It's just so rich with information.
That's great. Rebecca, how have you explained, I guess, NAEP to people? They say, well, it's not school or student individual results, but how would you, explain how NAEP can still be a good, tool for them and a good resource for them?
Well, I think a lot that NAGB has been trying to do is explain assessments and how assessments impact learning in the classroom. and how assessments impact decision making. We did a parent summit a year back, and we invited parent leaders to come have these conversations. And it is really tough to say this, your child's specific data is not part of the report, but when you start to have a conversation, especially in an urban district, about caring about all kids and caring about how that all students' achievement is moving, then you start to get people to advocate differently. So just having folks understand excuse me, how your state is doing, and being able to break that down by demographics, being able to break down the background variable questions so you understand some of the factors that might impact achievement, that gets people really interested in advocating for public schools and all kids.
Wonderful. I did want to pose a thing to you both. What would you both say is your go-to resource for education data? I know obviously you both have used NAEP and turned people on to NAEP and show how NAEP can be a resource. Are there other types of education data that's kind of your go-to? And is there types of data, would you say, that you would like to see that can benefit educators, parents, or students? Rebecca, did you want to kind of take
Sure.
that one first?
I'd love to. As the state of Minnesota and Minneapolis Public Schools, we have been working really, really hard on the data dashboard concept, which NAGB has done a great job, but having everything accessible in one place and in a way that's visual and for visual learners, so you have infographics and things like that. But it would be nice. So we have the Council of Great City Schools. They have amazing education research, and they use a lot of NAEP data in their research. But to be able to pull a lot of that together and have a common source, especially with organizations that particularly use NAEP data, that would be, because you can have the expanded research that a lot of other groups do. They use NAEP for their research. To be able to have that easily accessible to people would be invaluable.
Yeah, definitely. Doris, how about you? What would you say is your kind of go-to resource for education data? And also, are there types of education data you'd like to see that you think would benefit a lot of people?
Absolutely. And Stefan, I'm so glad you asked that. Let me just start off by telling you, many years ago, and I mean many years ago, one of the most vexing issues that I came across, where do we go for the rich data that we needed in order to make informed decisions about the school? And I must tell you, the go-to resource that I use and that all the educators use is the NAEP data. It's an integral part of our planning at King Charter School. And let me also tell you that NAEP data is not an end itself, but it is a means to improving our educational program at King. So again, my go-to is the NAEP data, because as I mentioned earlier, if we want sample test questions, okay, we have it there. If we want to see how other school districts are doing, we have it there. If we're concerned about 12th grade preparedness, and we are, because we find that a lot of 12th graders are on college campuses not ready, it's there. So whatever we need, we find it on the NAEP website. And as I mentioned earlier, we turn our parents onto it, we turn our students onto it, and the teachers are constantly there. So there, we have everything.
Great. Doris, I kind of want to on that plane, you can say, you know, obviously you're a principal. So if you were to, you know, talk with another principal and, you know, they would come to you, how do you think I can best use NAEP, you know, in my role as a leader of the school, Doris? How would you think, you know, a principal, for example, can best use NAEP? Because, you know, we, you know, see NAEP as really being able to be used by an array of people, educators, parents, policymakers, a variety of people. But how would you counsel a principal, say, to be able to use NAEP?
Well, let me start off by telling talking to a principal and talking to the teachers are probably in the same framework. And as I mentioned earlier, I would suggest to them, and I have suggested to them, that they start off by first of all getting familiar with the NAEP data, the rich data that's on there, getting familiar with that and getting comfortable with that, and then starting off the school year the way that I start off, by, of course, professional development, bringing the teachers in and looking at what NAEP has on the website and going from there, because there's just so much on that website. There's just so much for everybody that's concerned with education, that want to make those good decisions about education. And all of us are interested in improving where we are and making sure that students, of course, are taught by effective teachers, and that those effective teachers that we have are using the rich data, as much data as possible, to just look at it and decide, make good decisions about the school.
Great. Okay, Rebecca, you're not just on the school board, but you're a parent.
Yep.
And so if either a parent and maybe someone on the school board, somewhere else in Minnesota, somewhere else said, well, you know, NAEP sounds great. How do you think I should use this? Maybe if you want to maybe first start with what a parent can do, and then perhaps with someone like, say, a local school board member who oversees local schools, how maybe they can use NAEP.
So as a parent, the way that NAEP is so helpful is it provides a different assessment data from the state testing. And in Minnesota, some of the stuff that's happening right now is this big opt-out movement, the kind of anti-testing, we're over-testing. And NAEP it's not a high-risk test. So kids are going in without the stress, taking this assessment, and it provides, I think, a different context for parents, but it also provides them with information to go to the state legislature and advocate for public education. And Minnesota does very well on the NAEP. It does very well compared nationally, and that is a story that they can take to the Capitol, and legislators listen to parents. So I think that's a big role that NAEP can play. And as a school board member, again, as Doris says, it's a treasure trove of information, of research. It's used in a variety of, for research organizations to do studies, and it just provides unending data points that really help you pull together what the best practices are to move our education.
Wonderful. We have a question. That I wanted to pose to both of you that came in. Are you aware of other areas of the country that are setting good examples for putting education data into action? You both have talked about things in your areas and how you've used them. Are there other examples across the country that you've seen either locally or nationally where you feel like data is being used and put into action to produce positive change? Rebecca, did you want to start with that? Any
Certainly.
examples you can think of?
Well, you know, off the top of my head, I think some really interesting and effective things that are happening, like especially I talk about urban districts a lot, sorry, because that's what I deal with a lot. And in places like New York City, they've gone to these small high school models because they have realized there are students that have greater needs for more wraparound support, kind of full service schools. So they have a large high school, but maybe 3 small high schools within with 3 leaders. And so kids have a closer community. They also are keeping schools open to welcome in parents and families before and after school to provide continuing education and family education while providing tutoring and dinner for families in that school community. So just kind of looking at how schools are a different part of the community, and we're an integral part of communities, and getting that buy-in. So it's not just about the educator and the student in the classroom, it's about all of us supporting our kids.
Right. Doris, I wanted to pose that to you too. Are there examples that you've seen across the country that you think is a really good example of putting data into good use and producing action?
Well, actually, I'd like to start with Rebecca. She and I have had conversations about it. I certainly would like to give kudos to Rebecca and her group. Also, I have heard that Garden Grove, School in California certainly would be one that I've read about actually. I've talked to some folks. I've heard about Aldine Independent School District in Texas, and they're also one that I'd like to highlight. And as Rebecca indicated, in New York and Connecticut, we have Achievement First, and it's 5 public schools. Now, all of them have histories of steadily improving student achievement, and all of them are urban districts. But I'd like to also say there are just so many that are doing wonderful things with data. I mean, it's hard to pinpoint one because we can't go very far unless we use the data in order to inform school districts. So those are some that I've heard about. We have some teachers who are going to go and see a couple of them. They went last year to New York and Washington. So there are just a lot of school districts, urban school districts, that are doing wonderful things with data.
Yeah, wonderful. One thing I did want to get at, we kind of briefly went over the NAEP data backpack online, and one of the things we emphasize on that site is apart from just getting the actual data like scores, numbers, and stuff, and results from various texts, a big thing is, and we've talked about this more at the governing board, is contextual variables, those factors, whether you're want to look at, like, for example, do students, do they go to, say, science museums, for example, or how often do they read at home, things like that, that provide a context for the scores. And also we have things like the frameworks that show how basically we build the test, essentially the skills that we have that kind of inform the NAEP exam. What would you say, apart from just, the mere scores that we have on various subjects, good data, other things in NAEP that you feel like people should know? Rebecca, I know you talked about NAEP being a treasure trove, and I like for your thoughts of kind of going in, I guess, the tools that we have apart from just mere numbers, how you think that can be used, how you think that can be a good tool for people.
Certainly. Being on the Reporting and Dissemination Committee, we talk a lot about contextual variables. And if you're looking at things like students that have books in the home have this much higher scale score than students who don't, according to the contextual variables, I mean, that makes a significant impact. And there's a lot of information like that within our contextual variables. But we also talk about how do we look at the impact of poverty. And it used to be that we just said, well, if a student qualified for free and reduced lunch, then we're going to put them in that category. But now we're looking at a greater number of variables that kind of tell the entire story of a student that may have less access to opportunity and less access to economic support, community support. And so we're defining it differently, so it's not just one factor. So I think those things are really rich for people to look at and create a different narrative, not excuses, but changes, simple changes that we can make, things that we can inform parents about. And that's why parent education is so important and community support of public education is so important.
Right. Doris, did you want to chime in on that? One thing that we've talked about is kind of the board is really pushing to kind of, I think, have more context for NAEP. You know, NAEP is really rich in of itself, but really kind of having the context of things like the variables and such. So what's your thought about that?
Absolutely. And I'd like to start off by saying, and Rebecca alluded to that, and I'd just like to just take that a little further. There are many challenges that we face in urban education, urban systems. And Rebecca mentioned a higher concentration of poverty. And that's there also. And also the number of students that are in single family homes. And then, of course, hitting on those other variables that are so important, the after school activities, characteristics, those kinds of things. And it is important for us. It is important for us to look at other things other than just the test scores. And those contextual variables, those background questions will certainly help us because those are the things that affect school. Those are the things that affect learning. And if we as educators are able to get that information, then it will help us in promoting the high achievement that we all want. So again, as you indicated, Stefan, we're looking at the numbers, we're looking at the test results, but what's behind that? And certainly, when we go and look at those variables, the background variables, we're able to see how much, as Rebecca alluded to, how much are they reading? How do they feel about school? We're able to talk to teachers, their thoughts on it. Then we get information from the school. So there are a lot of things behind the test scores when those test scores come in. So again, that's just huge for us. Those contextual variables are just huge for us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, thank you. And we have a question that came in from one of our viewers again. He asked, can you please give some concrete examples about how you have used data to make policy changes? Rebecca, since you're a school board member and you know, obviously part of a board where you make these decisions on policy, can you respond to that first?
So one study that we have, which I just love, I think is so invaluable, is the curriculum study around math. And when we looked at honors versus not honors, what is being taught in the schools and how is it being labeled? And across the nation, we found an incredible variability, I guess is a nice word for it, of something be honors and it not, and things being labeled just regular algebra and it was a much higher level. And then the percentage of students of different demographics, different backgrounds that were enrolled in those different classes. You know, across our district, we really did an audit of our curriculum, and we've gone to standards-based instruction, but we also made sure that students were getting linear algebra, you know, geometry. Those things meant the same thing across all of our secondary schools. And it just created just a tremendous conversation that people, they just take for granted that if for kids being enrolled in an honors class, that it's a higher level academic class, and that was not what that the research found.
Right. Rebecca, on you know, as a school board member, have there been any recent incidents where you maybe your board has seen data or results from a test, either local, state, national, and you've maybe put into action some type of plan or a specific policy to address something?
So, you know, we have a number of schools that struggle pretty significantly, and we're part of the federal mandate to turn around some schools nationally. And one of those schools, we saw co-teaching working in other districts, and we implemented a small class size co-teaching model. And with those grade levels, the next year we saw significant growth in math scores in those grade levels where we had co-teaching and math specialists, which were all best practices that we got from looking at other urban districts, other school districts that were moving the needle better than we were with our students, especially our students, African American students, our African American boys, and our students that come from a low income background. So that was something that we've done, and then we invested more money into that this year. We're going to expand that. We're reducing our administration. We have an entire strategic plan so that we push a lot more resources out into schools so we can reduce class sizes and create that collaborative teaching model in more of our schools because we're finding that that's working.
Interesting. Doris, I want to kind of post that. You know, you're a principal, so you obviously make choices for just your school, not the whole parish or down there. But have there been any examples where maybe you've seen data from either, you know, tests or things you've done in your school, and you've made changes? Maybe you know, had, you know, maybe if you saw results you didn't like in math, maybe you know, changed the curriculum, or perhaps, you know, maybe tutoring or something like that. Are there examples of how you've kind of used data to really change things at King Charter School?
Well, let me tell you, and I'm so glad you asked. We don't make policies, of course. We do have a school board. And as I indicated earlier, we're all about data here. And we take that very seriously because we know we will not be able to increase student achievement if we didn't look very carefully at that and make the necessary decisions based on the data. But I need to tell you, Stefan, when we look at the data, and it's ongoing from the formative data as well as the summative data, we look at that in all sources, and we look at that, and there are some decisions that we do make. I mean, we look at our reading data, and if we have to, and we're in a unique situation here with charter schools because we can devote a little more time here and there. So if there was one instance we felt the reading scores were not where they should be. So we, of course, made some changes there. We were able to just put more minutes on the reading, and we do that often with math, with science, social studies. So it works well for us when we look at the data, many sources of data, and we look at what our kids are doing, and if they're not doing as well as we'd expected, as well as they expected, then we're able to make changes. We're able to make good decisions based on the data that we have in front of us.
Right. One thing I wanted to post, you both serve large urban diverse areas. You know, they have their own challenges. And I wanted to see with that, how do you think data, whether it's NAEP data or other forms of data, can really be used to kind of used to make change or to improve things, particularly with that context of being in a diverse environment, urban environment. There's lots of challenges, lots of students who have different types of needs, and the school system really becomes this big resource for them. How do you think data can be best used to kind of help with challenges that large schools face? Doris, did you want to start that, particularly with New Orleans?
Absolutely, absolutely. And let me just point out, particularly with New Orleans, it's not unique to New Orleans, but absolutely, there are many, many challenges that we faced. Rebecca alluded to one, a higher concentration of poverty, and certainly that's here at King Charter School. The number of students from one single family homes, and of course that's here. And of course, their attitudes toward education, the characteristics of the home life, uh, uh, extracurricular activities. Those are the things that we face and many, many more. So, what we do, we have something that we started at King Charter School. We have Data Day, and we just bring our school in, we bring all of our data, we talk about it collaboratively, and we look at where we are and the population of students we serve, and the needs that exist at our school. And based on the data, we're able to meet the state mandates, but we may have to get there differently than another school. So we're able to do that very, very effectively. And as I said earlier, we're constantly using the contextual variables that are there, looking at our kids and looking what they're saying about school, their attitude. And of course, I can't stress enough the importance of going to that website and looking at the data that's there, and we're able to use. So in urban districts, it's different, but it's very, very exciting, meeting the needs of students that are out there. So that's good for us. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank Rebecca. I think Minneapolis, large school system, and I know particularly your schools have a fairly sizable immigrant population.
Yes.
So, I'd be curious to see your thoughts of, particularly with such a diverse, large school system, how do you think data can be best used to meet the challenges that your schools face every day?
Yes, we do. We actually have, and within the immigrant population, we have such diversity. We have a lot of students coming from interrupted or no formal education. We have 4 major languages, one being Hmong, which is a fairly new language. We have kids that speak their another language but are not literate in their language. And one thing that the data helps us is when you're looking at such diversity that Doris talks about, and she does such a brilliant job in serving her school, serving individual children, is that's what needs to happen. Is every child cannot be served the same. Every program, there's overarching things that have to happen, but individual kids have individual needs and need individualized instruction. So data really helps us get at that for each child, not necessarily maybe the larger standardized tests, more individualized classroom assessment data, but it really helps all those different data points. It helps us look at how we're moving greater achievement, and then we can work down to the individual child and figure out how to meet their specific needs.
All right, right. Okay, one thing I wanted to pose, we talked already about Common Core. There are tests like PISA and TIMSS that are international that you can see how the U.S. ranks in various subjects like math and science, for example, compared to other countries. There are local tests. There's NAEP. You can imagine parents, educators, leaders, feeling like there's just so much information out there. How would you kind of ideally like for this data to come together? I think when we were having this conversation, there was kind of an illusion of kind of trying to connect the dots. And I know, Rebecca, you talked about how the school system there has a dashboard. How do you think perhaps we can best kind of use all this test information we're getting to somehow try to connect the dots? Is it perhaps, would the ideal be, for example, having this big dashboard where you see, say, NAEP and other tests, and you kind of can see the big picture? Or how do we parse things, since we feel like, I'm sure a lot of people may feel like there's just so much information out there. What do I do with it? How would you respond to that?
So interesting that you bring this up. Within NAGB, we've created a assessment literacy task force, and I'm fortunate to serve on that, and we're having these conversations. How do we get parents, policymakers, and students, how do we get them the information in a relevant way so that it impacts their decision making, informs them on public education, and maybe just around their own child or around impacting their school, their district, or their state legislation. So that's a conversation we're having, and it is really important to look at organizations that stakeholders trust, like a parent organization, a national organization, and how do we get them to share NAEP data in a relevant way with their stakeholders, because they're already a trusted source. So I really do believe at the end of the day, it is connecting the dots and having a common place that people can go to look at trusted education resource, because there's also a lot of stuff out there, Stefan, that's not so fabulous. And
right. And how do you discern? Yeah.
Right.
Right. Doris, what are your thoughts about that? If, if you can kind of somehow help people connect the dots, or what would be your ideal for how we can really kind of gather this data that's out there?
Well, actually, now I know whatever we do, we're going to put the label connecting the dots. Love that. And actually, as Rebecca and of course Stephon, you alluded to, there's good data and there's good data. So
Right.
again, how do we get it out there? And that's what we've been discussing. How do we get it out there for educators, for parents who want it, and on a large scale, and of course those policymakers. And I don't know if we have the answer yet, but it certainly is a good discussion. But here at King, and I'm bringing it home, we get our parents on board. But on a larger scale, I do like what Rebecca said, that we need to make sure that we're giving it to those parent leaders, and such as the one we had a couple years ago when we had parent organizations out. So we will say to them, this is the data that we have. They take data, of course, that's what we were interested in. And then they're going to give me other data, but giving it to them and also making it available for those policymakers and making sure that they have it. I don't know. Do we do a huge dashboard, as Rebecca said? Actually, I don't know. But it's just a wealth of data, and they have to get it. They have to get it in some way. But I do know whatever way they're going to get it, it's going to be called connecting the dots.
I think that's a good that's a good phrase we could use going forward. And on that note, I think that's a good place to stop. And I want to thank both Doris and Rebecca for their comments and thoughts. This discussion was all about, how do we use data to help improve achievement, and also as a tool and resource. And I think hopefully we've given a lot of people really thoughts about how that can be done. And I know the governing board, we're really on a quest to really make data impactful and resourceful, because NAEP has a lot of good things going on, and we want to make sure folks know about that. So I do want to mention for the audience that today's Hangout has been recorded, and we will post this in the coming days on the event page here at Google Plus, as well as the Governing Board's YouTube channel. I do want to refer people to the Governing Board's website, www.nagb.gov, and there you can kind of link to our Facebook page, our Twitter page, and our YouTube channel, and we will have on that homepage links that we'll post to this recorded discussion so people can play it back and use it. And we hope this is really just the beginning of the discussion on how we can take important information and really use it for good and really make it impactful. So again, I want to thank Doris and Rebecca. You both have been great, and I think you've shown how education data can be used, and we hope that could inspire other people. So I want to thank you both and thank the audience again for participating, and thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.